Will you stand as we read from God's word, please? The reading comes from 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 22 through 29. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress. If one man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. And the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor both with the Lord and men. Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, 'Thus says the Lord, did I not clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all of the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire? Why did you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling place, and honor your sons more than me, to make yourselves fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel, my people?'" You may be seated.
Good evening. Glad we could be here together tonight. Reference to the weather has already been mentioned. We'll be talking about that a lot this week. Some of our services are contingent, obviously, on school being open. Call will be made about Wednesday services if the weather does what they think it will be. I'm looking ahead at the low temperature Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and we probably will not have our ladies' Bible class. Don't want any dangers there, but we'll officially announce about that later. But pray for all those affected. All of you as parents, maybe grandparents, know by now that our campers are coming back in tonight at 9 o'clock-ish. So that's, I think Noel's got that on the announcements too, but probably a good call just in the interest of safety and trying to be good stewards. I'm glad it worked out that they could get a ride home, get a bus available for that. On our prayer list, Shalane Sadler is in Hendersonville Hospital. They've asked no visitors, and that's all they want to divulge as far as her being there, but prayers for her recovery, please. You might have noticed on the tables there along the back wall are some Valentines. Can't remember if they're preschool or Bible travels, or maybe both of those worked on those, but several have not been claimed. Go back and look for your name on those. Appreciate Carolyn Collins, who's not here, but the work she did, and others, teachers and the students that had a hand in getting those to the different ones in the congregation certainly as well. All right, it's like I had one more thing to announce. Don't see it. Maybe this is it. Our Change for Children benefiting Potter Children's Home. Saw some of you taking those this morning that hadn't had an opportunity before then to get those. Continue to get them. If we get them all snatched up, we'll get some replacements. But be bringing those in. We got till July. And glad that we can be one of the congregations that Potter depends upon to be very generous, to have a good representation of our membership when it comes to that. We're looking at a lesson tonight. I meant to kind of promote it this morning, Parents in Pain. We all like and need lessons about home and family. I don't know if this is a 1950s TV couple. I'm sure some of you will tell me if it rings a bell. If they are, I don't remember seeing in those episodes, but kind of I was trying to think about a picture of what it is to be a parent in pain, and I don't know if that's befuddlement or perplexity or just what, but I almost can imagine that some children cause the looks on those faces there. And I don't think that died out, half a century ago. We're going to talk about a serious topic, and one that won't be as pleasant maybe as looking at those faces. And this lesson is not designed to inflict pain. This is not one of those knife twists for those already undergoing hardship, but rather talking about, hopefully in a healthy way and maybe in a practical way, ways of getting through some of the pain and the hardship that we face, and definitely ways that we can eliminate and hopefully on the front end just reduce it, help it to be more manageable. I have in my short, growing into a fairly long life that I've lived, run across a lot of families dealing with a lot of hardships and difficulties. And some of the most difficult, heart-wrenching, have to do with pain. Pain as parents. And some of you can relate to that. Some of you can only relate hypothetically. It's not something you've either endured. That may be because you're not parents yet, or it may be because you've had good kids, and you ought to feel fortunate, very blessed, especially if you've had a hand in them being good kids and respectful and good contributing members to society. We all know parents that in spite of their best efforts and in spite of their righteous living have a child, maybe a combination of children, who either for a short period of time, maybe a longer period of time, get away from God. They leave the path of faithfulness and start walking a path of unfaithfulness, and it is such a difficult thing. There is consternation and just grief over those parents who read a passage like Proverbs 22:6 that still says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And they pull their hair out asking, what in the world did we do? Or maybe what did we not do that would have helped this child or these children be what they ought to be? That passage, as I am always quick to remind folks, is not a 100% guarantee. It's not a fail-safe, proven method in where all bad parents have bad kids and all good parents have good kids. When we think about parents in pain, I know that some of you are thinking, you know what, there are a lot of children in pain too. Indeed there are. And there are a lot of spouses undergoing pain tonight. Indeed there are. Those are other lessons. This will be specifically about parents, not minimizing others that may be directly and even indirectly influenced by some of the things we want to talk about. If I were to ask you, who is the original wounded parent in the Bible, I wonder what kind of answer you would come up with. Is there an original wounded parent that the Bible speaks of? My suggestion to us is this. Indeed, I think there is, and his name is God. God is the original wounded parent. Maybe you're not thinking in terms of deity. You're looking at Adam and Eve and some of the early stories there. But when I think about a parent undergoing hardship and suffering, don't leave God out of the equation. Understand in a way that transcends even any human. God saw that first pair that he created, put them in that perfect paradise. You know, it's almost like a parent telling a child, you know what, you've got 100 toys you can play with, 100 of them, but one of them, in fact, 99 play with, one, it's off limits. Don't touch it, don't look at it, don't have anything to do with it. You'll be punished if you do. Sure enough, parent turns her back 15 minutes later. They've gravitated toward the one, playing with it, experimenting with it. 99, why did you have to do that? And so much larger context than just a toy that's been forbidden. God says, I can't have you in this beautiful paradise anymore. You are expelled. And God deals with what he knew would happen, but certainly didn't like it any more than it actually happening in real time. Dealt with the ramifications and the consequences that would affect not just Adam and Eve, but their family and the whole human family. And eventually would be checkmated only by the sending of his perfect son, Jesus Christ. But it took that to try to counteract the effects of transgression. When we talk about parents in pain, can we talk about some of the manifestations of pain? As you think about that word, how do we perceive it? It's obviously physical. That's the first thing I associate with pain. Something hurts. Something that sometimes Tylenol and even our stronger pain medications can't touch there. Physical pain is a real pain, isn't it? There's another sense of pain. Sometimes it's emotional in nature. Some people may never hurt much physically, but they go hardships and just their spirit is wounded. They're crushed emotionally by several things that happen to them. Sometimes it's what we call mental anguish. There can be a mental pain similar to emotional, maybe slightly differentiated, and even spiritual pain. Spiritual pain over our guilt, over grief, over someone whose soul is not right in the sight of God. And so a combination of those can be held. And thank pity the parents who are hurting in all of those ways, maybe because their children are suffering in these. This pain, by the way, can be temporary. Sometimes it's not that, well, I live with this. Other times it is chronic. Those parents who have children may be born with the birth defect that will not be corrected. There's not a surgeon that can touch this. There's not enough money you can throw at a clinic or a doctor to make this right. And the fact that for as long as that child lives, or the parents, or both, it will be an issue that's dealt with. A lot of possibilities when you come to manifestation, certainly, of pain there. Parenting is a venture of faith that hopes that joy and satisfaction and the blessing outweigh the opposites, the negative things that can and often are a real aspect of parenting, either by our own experience or what we see in others. There was a quote, I want to share this, make sure I get it right. I don't trust my memory here. But someone, in fact, her name is Hazel Scott, she wrote this: there's a time when your children, or when you have to explain to your children why they're born, and it's a marvelous thing if you know the reason by then. Why in the world, since some people are suffering and may never have that suffering abate, how in the world would we ever decide to have children? And I go back to the statement we just read on the screen there. It's a great venture of faith. There is the hope, because we had the ideal in our mind of what this ought to look like and what it has looked like. That even with the hardships and the pain, there'll be the joy and the satisfaction, the pride in seeing our children thrive and flourish. And the blessing will outweigh. It will be, hopefully, if it's 51% to 49, at least I've had a little more of the good than the bad. We all know the possibilities going in, don't we? And so with that in mind, let's talk about some ways that parents have suffered and indeed are suffering even tonight. Sometimes we hurt because our children hurt. It is an indirect pain, but I guarantee you it is a real pain. And the hurting starts pretty early, doesn't it? Think about a mother with a newborn child, hearing it cry for the first time, the most delightful sound in the world, but at the same time wanting to dry the tears up and make it so that you're not, as you enter the world from this nice warm womb into cold and to bright lights and noises, you want to make it easy right away, don't you? And then teething starts and fevers and sniffles and all those things that may be minor in comparison to the other things that come. The heart aches and the heart breaks and broken bones and different things that happen to kids. Can't imagine many parents seeing a child suffer in any way, whether it's just a few minutes or hours or days, and just have a kind of a ho-hum attitude, no big deal. I heard when I was a kid too. There's something about, especially a mother, that God has put, I believe, to make us want to sympathize and to intervene, to step in and alleviate that suffering if at all possible. You think about sick children during the ministry of Jesus that were brought to him. Sometimes he sought them out, and the parents' desperation. Here is a child that I really believe that you can help. Would you please? Often when you have a parent talking to Jesus about the child that's sick or diseased, it's not in respectful tones. And I'm not saying disrespectful, but it's not a polite asking, would you do this? It's almost a desperate demand of Jesus. My child is sick. My child is at the point of death. Please. Begging Jesus to do something. And we rejoice to see those children healed. And to know the relief parents would feel were we in their shoes to have that child whole again, well and healthy. And so even in the Old Testament, there were several healings that involved children there. We hurt when our children hurt. And that's not a fun thing to go through. I've talked to mothers who have given birth more than once and say, I would go back and go through the pain of childbirth dozens, hundreds of times over, rather than to see my child suffer in the ways that they are, and especially a very particular source of pain later, a rebellion. Let's talk about one that I don't even wish, I thought about not putting this up there, but we need to. Sometimes parents hurt, and shouldn't all parents hurt when if a child passes away? Bible pictures in real terms the idea that sometimes there are stillborn children. Sometimes children don't make it very early in life. Some of them leave. Some of the hardest things I've done in personal ministry is trying to be there with parents who have a stillbirth, have a child, young child, 6 years old, to pass away. I guarantee you they're not words. And it is a heart-wrenching thing to try to put yourself in those shoes and relate to what they're feeling. Many of you have, if not gone through that, certainly have had friends or maybe other family members to do that. In the Bible, we could talk about Adam and Eve. I don't have them up there, but imagine the pain, and they have multiple levels of this, where, yes, their second son dies by the name of Abel, and yes, it's their firstborn son, Cain, that kills him. Very first death recorded in the Bible of a human. Fratricide, a brother against a brother. And so Adam and Eve lose Abel, but they also lose Cain, who is banished from their side. By the way, Sandra's been teaching this to the ladies on Wednesday night. Who was it that Cain is married to? Probably one of his sisters, which means Adam and Eve's daughter. So losing multiple children. There's no way to quantify that or to put certainly a universal attachment to the feeling that every parent suffers there. I think about Old Testament Joseph. When he is sold by his brothers into slavery, and Jacob/Israel, the father, when they bring the blood-soaked garment back, coat of many colors, is this your son's? Jacob makes the association, I guess any of us would. Yes, it is. Some wild beast has killed him. And he says something that just rips your heart out back in Genesis. In chapter 37, verse 35, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Translation, this is just about to kill me. Can you relate to that? And we know Joseph's not even dead, but he thinks he is. There have been a lot of parents over the years that had to live in that no man's land of, is my child alive or dead? It's an abduction here. It's a child at war over there. And so maybe days and then weeks, possibly months, eventually pass, and we haven't heard, and so we don't know. Joseph, as he was away there in Egypt, Jacob had written him off and invest in that younger son, Benjamin, that he loved so much. And when they finally tell him, the brothers, when they're going to Egypt to buy grain, Joseph being the principal over all that, when they say, you know what, we need our brother to come back, Jacob's reluctant. I've lost Joseph. I am not about to send Benjamin too. I shudder to think that's not an actual translation there, but he talks about it in terms of chapter 42, verse 30. It'll bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave if I lose him as well. And then the glad reunion. When finally Jacob gets there with all the household to Egypt and he sees Joseph's son, the one he never dreamed of seeing again in the flesh in this life. There is a glad reunion, and the statement, I didn't think to see you alive, and now I'm also seeing these, my grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he blesses them. He says something unusual when he first has the reunion with Joseph. He says, now let me die. Since I'm seeing your face, since I know that you're alive, I'm ready to die. And you're thinking, don't die. Enjoy the time together you have before that. But we know what he's saying. What a joyous reunion. Sometimes it wasn't always that way. When Jesus was born, Mary was told something in Luke chapter 2, verse 35. I don't know that she comprehended it then. She would later. But when Simeon is blessing the child, she brings him there to the temple. He talks about a sword piercing your own soul also. Many of us believe that the sword that pierced the soul of Mary was seeing her son die, a very inglorious death, very painful death. When he speaks those words to her in John chapter 19, woman, behold your son, and son, behold your mother. That was a very tender nod to this woman that had brought life to him and had been so faithful to him. And we can only imagine the heartbreak, knowing that on that side she probably didn't fully understand the full purpose of Jesus' own death as well. Other parents who lost children, you know that of the 3 times in the Gospels where Jesus resurrected the dead, 3 times, 2 of those were children, one a boy and one a girl. Imagine those parents that in faith but also in desperation are encountering one who is the author of life, one who had control over life and death, to be able to say, okay, your son lives. Little girl, I say to you, arise, and have her do that would have been just about the most amazing thing. I'm sure those parents, if they could have that child back alive again and walk around in poverty, if they were required to give up everything that they had or pay off a debt that was truly just momentous, any of them would have said, sure, I'll do it in a heartbeat. We love our children so much. Bless parents in pain because of children that are no more. There's another one, and we go back to Adam and Eve for this, when children rebel. When children rebel. I've heard parents say, you know what, my child is still living. It is as if they are dead. They have taken themselves away from me. They're out of my life. I don't know how to contact them in some cases. I called them. They will not return my calls. It is as if they are dead. For all purposes, they are dead to me and dead to the world. It's not always that case. But to imagine living with a child there who no prospect of seeing again in this life. Aaron had 2 sons that he was proud of, actually 4 at one time, but the 2, Nadab and Abihu, had the same blessings of being exposed to the law of God, had the ordination ceremony where they are set apart. They are qualified, now in a position to offer sacrifices to God. They do something recorded in just a couple of verses. They offer strange or profane fire to the Lord, which he had not authorized. And in a moment's time, fire came from the Lord and devoured them. It consumed them. They were dead in a heartbeat. Think about Aaron and his wife seeing that, being witness to it, and knowing that their death was in response to a very rebellious act. And even for the moment, them not being able to mourn or physically embrace the grief that was flooding over them at that time. Almost more than you can imagine. Our scripture reading tonight was from 1 Samuel 2 about Eli and his sons, and pity them. You know, it's sad what is said about them. That was just a little sampling there. And in that reading in 1 Samuel chapter 2, if you go back earlier in the chapter, verse 12, it says the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. You're saying, how's that possible? They're assisting the priests there. They are offering sacrifices. They did not know God. They're going through the motions spiritually. Their hearts were far away from him. When you come to chapter 3, verse 13, it says, I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. Eli, do you feel good about your sons? No. I love them. Wish they weren't doing what they were doing. You know, the Bible even records the fact that he rebuked these sons, told them, I can't believe you're doing this. You know this is not right. This is not going to turn out well in the end, and they still paid him no mind. Parents, have you gotten tired of talking to those children? That child that knows better, raised in Sunday school perhaps, maybe for a big part of their life, very active, wouldn't think about forsaking the assembly for a moment, and now where are they? Hurts, doesn't it? Now, let me talk about Eli versus some of you. That is, Eli knew what right was and knew what wrong was. saw them, I believe, very early on doing what was wrong, did not correct them, did not steer them in the direction. Now, I know they have free will. Your children have free will. Maybe sometimes, again, we have unnecessarily just beaten ourselves up over things that totally are out of our control, because those children have free will just like we do as well. But I certainly don't want to be a party to any child, my children, having a rebellious spirit and being judged in that way. And you know what is said when Samuel there is under the tutelage of Eli? You've got a contrast between this boy. Hannah's prayed for. She wants a son, not just a child. She didn't say, I want 10 fingers and 10 toes. I want a son. God, I'm going to give him to you. In fact, give him back to you as long as he lives. She kept her promise. A woman of devout prayer, that prayer was heard. And so at the proper time, she's weaned him, turns him over to Eli. Here he is. I'll bring him a new change of clothes every year as he's growing up, but he's yours. And you've got righteous Samuel there saying, speak, Lord, your servant hears. All the while, these two corrupt sons of Eli the priest are getting away with murder in the temple area. But you know what happens to Samuel? You come to 1 Samuel chapter 8, 3 through 5. His sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, look, you are old, your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. We rightfully say how foolish it was for Israel to demand a king, but the pretext of that, the context, is the sons that Samuel had every advantage of knowing could have been down a better path, that he didn't direct them, steer them, help guide them in the way that they should have. All I'm saying is we can relate to many parents in the Bible that have had children to veer away and be less desirable than what they could or should. What about this specific one there? Sometimes our children don't marry in-laws, they marry outlaws. And there's an interesting take on that back in Genesis. Let me give you a few verses on this. You got in Genesis 25, 27, and 28, reference to Jacob and Esau there. Jacob, you remember, is the skilled hunter, man of the field. Jacob's the mild man dwelling in tents. Isaac loves, which one? Esau. Rebekah loves Jacob. Favoritism that often kind of makes for a very unhealthy family environment, can lead to some pain in and of itself. But there's a reference in the next chapter, Genesis 26, 34 and 35, to Esau when he's 40 years old. Took his wife Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. A grief of mind. A lot of parents wish that, you know what, all the pain's over at the time they're 18, maybe 22. Let's get them a college degree or well on their way, and I'll be done with them. They're out of my hair. They're on their own. A lot of you parents are smiling. That's not the way it works, is it? No, because when you've invested in them and you love them, you want them to excel and to thrive and to keep being spiritual-minded people, and you still have a powerful influence in their lives, although they are on their own. But in Genesis 27, verse 46, Rebekah ruefully says to Isaac there, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, like those who are of the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? And by the way, nothing is really said about what these girls were doing, but I kind of side with Rebekah there. I kind of feel like these girls were a bad choice for Esau, among several other bad choices he made in his life. And parents, what can you do about that? Sometimes our pain is that indirect pain of watching them. We've given them the roots and we've given them the wings, and instead of flapping their wings, they do a face plant on the cement, and we're thinking, what in the world? Use your wings. Make some good choices there. Parents, are you hurting because of any of these? What about the man named David? Someone says, you hadn't mentioned him yet. Oh, well, we could spend hours on David, couldn't we? A veritable case study of almost all the things that can and possibly do go wrong in parenting, because he suffers the loss of children. A child while he's alive, the Bible says is human experience says is one of the greatest stressors of all. One that no parent I've ever met said, you know what, I would like to know what that's like. But he goes through that. He sees children, at least different ones, rebel against him. And certainly there's kind of an anarchy. And so David, part of the consequences of a very foolish choice in his life, knows firsthand. Man after God's own heart he is, but often not because of his choices, in spite of them, suffers greatly because of sometimes his shortcomings, his failure to invest in the most important thing he had going for him, and that was his children. Not the throne, not the monarchy, certainly at all. Let's go to another slide here. In fact, I've got that little one floating up there that says how sad godly parents are when their children turn from God. Many a mother either has said or would say, again, childbirth was nothing compared to the idea of my son, my daughter, being far away from God. You know, maybe a lesson here, let's reinforce this real quick, is if you are that son or daughter, you be faithful. Not just because it'll be easier on your mom and dad. You do it because it's the right thing. You do it because you don't want to wound that first wounded parent, that is God. But out of respect for them, even do the right thing. Let's talk about God for a moment, because can you imagine, can you, experiencing firsthand? Some of us do it indirectly. We do it from a distance, but God firsthand knows all of the heartache and the heartbreak and hassle of not just dozens, hundreds, thousands, multiplied billions of all the people that started out in Eden and are going down to the present time. And God dealing with all of that pain at a moment. Him feeding and clothing and providing for a majority of children, sons and daughters who are thankless. Don't acknowledge Him. Don't appreciate what He's done. Some of you could say, I've either had someone in my family, and hopefully it wasn't your child, that didn't ever seem to really get it and grasp the gratitude they ought to have for what you're doing, sacrifices you're making. But God, don't ever feel like you're on an island, you're isolated. God couldn't possibly identify with the pain you feel, because understand, in a much larger way He does. But in spite of the bad ones, whether they're in a vast majority or maybe just a small majority, how God must delight in any who are His children, who are grateful and obedient and that do His will out of a loving heart. Going back to the children, God had a choice. He didn't have to create us. Didn't have to start with Adam and Eve, but He did. And He did that for a reason, and there's something powerful. I tell often expectant parents for the first time, you will get a glimpse of God that you will have as a parent you never would have otherwise. I'm not saying it's going to be a perfect view, that you'll have God's eyes, but you will have an insight into how it must be. And I'll believe, again, that's because of the joys, but also maybe because certainly of the sorrows as well. Maya Angelou, poet, wrote this: "The thorn from the bush one is planted, nourished, and pruned pricks more deeply and draws more blood." And she wasn't talking about roses or bushes, was she? There is something special about the pain that parents feel. Let me give you some encouragement. And hopefully you're not ready to burst out the back doors crying at this point. But if you are a parent in pain, I hope there are some encouraging things that we could say. And by the way, if this isn't you, could you pass this on to someone else? Maybe some people that God has put in your life that need a reminder, need a little hope, need some consolation in a time like this. The presence of pain does not make for a bad parent. And I'll put in parentheses there, per se. I may be hurting because I was neglectful at a very crucial time, critical time in my child or our children's development. I can't go back and undo that. I can't rescue those years, but maybe they're not on a good path, and I am responsible, directly, indirectly, But because I hurt doesn't mean that I'm a bad parent per se. And I would say the best example of that is God himself. Anybody want to accuse God of being a terrible father? No. But he's got rebellious children. It's not God's fault. Because you're hurting doesn't mean that necessarily you have done something wrong, either the sin of omission or commission there. Take heart in that. Pain may come from a harvest of my own planting. And when that does happen, I would encourage people, you know what? Sometimes it's a matter of receiving forgiveness. God is not wanting you to go through life with half of what you are. He wants you to be as whole as you can be. And realize again, that like a wound can be cauterized. There can be a healing that takes place. You can't go back and undo it. Receive rather God's forgiveness. Go on. Go on. David did. In spite of the things that he faced, he had I think a dogged determination to keep on doing the best that he could in the moment that he was in. Here's the third encouragement. Although I hurt now, some of you are there may be a restoration of joy. I wish I could erase that may out and put a will be or shall be or something like that. I can't do that. I don't know. There may be a restoration of joy. I look about Psalm chapter 30, verse 5 there. The Bible there says, his anger, that's God's anger, is for a moment. His favor is for life. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Joy comes in the morning. Luke 15, that beautiful insight into the love of God, we call the parable of the prodigal son. How many times did that father say, you know what, he didn't come home yesterday, he's probably not coming home today, won't be coming home tomorrow. The day that son finally on the horizon makes his appearance and that little dot starts getting larger and larger, and no, it's not just one that looks like my son, it is him. Parents, hold out hope that with God there can be a restoration in a very beautiful and joyful way there. When in pain, I can still bless. In Psalm 51, after David's adultery with Bathsheba, that penitential psalm has David, again, focused for a while on what he did, knowing that he couldn't make it right, or you couldn't pay this off. God, I deserve death. Thank you for giving me forgiveness. And so, Lord, I want to teach sinners your way, transgressors, and sinners shall be converted to you. What can you do? Maybe your own child, your children are beyond redemption, at least at this point. But you know what? I think I've seen some parents, maybe in their middle ages and older, that take more of an interest in the younger generation. You may be a grandmother, a grandparent to a younger generation. You may throw your energy into a class and know that you're making a difference for those children. You may volunteer or do something either spiritually or in the community to say, I have something to give, and this will help me actually maybe even keep my sanity through a very difficult time there. Fifth and finally, although my righteousness may or may not affect my children and even future generations, I am going to do right anyway. You know, ultimately, I only answer for me. I may have an effect on my spouse, on my parents, may have an effect for good or bad on my children and grandchildren. But you know what? I will answer for me. Romans 14:12. So then each one of us shall give an account of himself to God. It'd be a pity if my children maybe rebel, turn away from God, and I say, you know what? If they're going to be lost, I'm just going to be lost too. I just can't imagine going through life. And so God, sorry, I need to realize God expects me, wants me to do right. And you know, if and when I do that, maybe even out or past my lifetime, that child will come back to God because he saw me. He saw your example and your influence and your determination certainly to do right. Let me close this lesson, and I hope something's been said either to make you feel better or make you be more determined to have a happy and a wholesome family. God appeared to Abraham out of the blue, Genesis 22, and he said, I want you to do something, Abraham. It's not an option. It's not a, what do you think about this? I want you to take Isaac, your only begotten son, the son of promise, and I want you to offer him on a mountain that I will show you. Offer him. That means kill him as a sacrifice. And in the intervening verses, Abraham does that. Isaac lets go. They got the wood and the fire, and Isaac on the way up says, everything's here, where's the sacrifice? Isaac's not a toddler. He's not a boy. He has the ability to communicate and to know, you understand. And so God will provide is the answer from Abraham there to his son. God will provide. Where's the lamb for the offering? If you've read that story and marveled and said, I wouldn't be Abraham. Couldn't do that. I can do a lot of things for God. I wouldn't offer my son. Wouldn't even think about offering a daughter to God. Abraham, I'm glad you did. Why'd you do that? Hebrews 11 says that Abraham accounted that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. All right, I'll kill him. God, he's the son of promise. You've said that descendants will flow through him, and so I hope he doesn't have to stay dead long. I hope you'll resurrect him on the spot. That's how Abraham figured it out. Hebrews 11 says, but no, it wasn't even that. God wanted Abraham's implicit trust, be willing and obedient, that even if I ask you to do something so unsavory, even that you'll do. No wonder God blessed this man the way he did. And no wonder God illustrates to us that on a very later occasion, when God would have wanted to protect that own son, that perfect son, a son of promise, God didn't. And Jesus trudged up Calvary's mountain and shed his blood for pitiful folks like me and you, sinners, unwilling and unable to do anything about our sin condition, except turn to the one who in his great love says, I care about you. Get this message. I hurt because you've rebelled against me, but I'm telling you what, I'm not writing you off. My forgiveness is abundantly available. Like the prodigal son, maybe he's looking, yearning, wanting a return of those who are apart from his will and is more than able to restore. Fatted calf and a robe and ring and sandals, rejoicing. Figuratively, you can have that tonight. Anybody who's away, have we told that message to the world? Are we getting that out there? Isn't that part of who we are and why we exist? When I come believing, confessing, repenting, being baptized, part of God's family, a redeemed, formerly rebellious child, now on my way to heaven, glory bound because of what he's done for me. Isn't that wonderful? We're going to sing a song in just a moment. If you need to come, there's a burden on your heart. Maybe that burden is a spiritual one. If it's something that you can do or need to do to take care of it, don't leave here with that burden. Don't carry that guilty conscience home with you anymore. If you're ready to begin a walk of faith and obedience, that option is always open as long as time stands. And thankfully, God has allowed it to. So if you need to come while we stand. Slow